Hi, everyone. Some of you have been emailing me with questions about how do I structure my course. I've set up the goals. I have the goals for my course. How do I display them in my sample project for the final part of this training? Well, I've hopefully put this video together in some semblance of order to help you determine what way you would like to show your students the learning objectives, the course learning objectives, the unit or module learning objectives, and even the student learning outcomes. I even had one of you who have asked me, I like how you do it in the online teaching elements training course. How did you do that? Well, I'm going to show you, hopefully, but I want to walk through a couple steps, of course. If you are going to put areas of your course together, it's typically a best practice to put all of your modules or units into one link under the course menu. Because if you were to, say, have a 16-week course and you put 16-week links up here, you can just imagine what it's going to look like from the student's perspective. If you've never looked at a course from a student's perspective, I invite you to come up to the top right. Click on what I call the hieroglyphic I, which is the two circling arrows with a dot in the center. Click that to enter the student preview. This gives you what your course looks like, a view of your students. So as you can see here, this course menu looks pretty long. Now, if you could imagine having 16 weeks on top of all of this information, that course menu is going to be pretty lengthy and students may get a little overwhelmed. So best practice, just from my perspective, of course, is to keep everything in general units. Start here, you could put all your syllabus and grading information, announcements, but most folks, especially in your course shells that you have for this training, you have a course content area. You can always rename these at any time. If you don't want to call it start here, you could say read first, syllabus, it could be course information and syllabus, announcements, instructor info, greet me. You could call these things whatever you wish with a simple click of a button. On the right-hand side of each of your course menu links, there's a gray circle with a white V. This is called the chevron. If you click it, then you can have options of renaming, hiding it, or even deleting it if you chose to. Say, for instance, I've clicked on the chevron next to course content. I'm going to rename this link to weekly areas. That's just for fun. So now I've called it weekly areas. If I click this link, it's still a content area where I have all of my course information and the materials, even my assessments, if I chose to. You could have your own area for assessments over here too. So if you wanted to set up a new content area for assignments, you could do that. We'll start with the way that I've structured the online teaching elements training. Some of you have asked about, oh, the table of contents that I see, I really like. You could put that there. It's very simple. In your course content or weekly area or whatever you're calling it, put your mouse over and hover over build content and navigate down to, if your mouse will let you, it's frustrating. Navigate down on the left-hand side. It's in the third section. Click on Learning Module. Once you click on Learning Module, it's going to ask you to create a learning module. This learning module would be your main page. This would be the main page where you would introduce everyone to the unit of information that you're planning to give. It could provide an overview, it could provide a brief description, it could even house your learning objectives and the outcomes students should be able to do once they're done going through the whole unit or module. I use the term synonymously. So let's say I'm going to call this week 1. You can see I'm doing a gerontology course. Week 1, introductions to learning. We'll just call it Introduction to Learning. So here I would give a brief description of what students will encounter and spell. So the overview or the gist of the material, nature. But say I want to do what I've done for the online teaching elements. I want to provide bulleted lists. For those of you that are familiar with Microsoft Word in one of its many versions, you'll note up here that you see a toolbar. Now, some of you may not. I'm going to show you how. If you go to the very far right of that toolbar, there should be two V's. Either they're facing with the point up or they're facing with the point down. I can close that just by clicking this button. If I hover over it, it'll tell me to show more. If I click on it and then hover back over it again, it tells me to show less. It's in the top row on the very far right. It's the icon with the two V's. Either they're facing up or they're facing upside down. If you have what I show here, which is just a single, there's three T's that show you the bold, italic, underline, font type, font size. I could even text color, change that, bullets, numbers, spell check, hyperlinks. We can get to that later if you wish. But if this is all you see, just navigate over to the very far right icon, which is the two V's, click it to expand. Here, you have a lot of other options available to you. You have the cut, you have the copy, the paste, search if you really wanted to. I don't use it very often. Undo, redo button. All of these icons are very similar to using very basic Microsoft Word program. You even have the process of exponents or superscripts. So much fun. You could even push things over with paragraphs, indent, outdent. There's just so much. There's so much. You could even get into tables if you're very savvy and you want to really be creative. That's definitely more advanced. But for the purposes here, I'm going to focus on how you could put objectives. So number one, as you've seen in the week, or as you've read, I should say, in week 2's material, we introduce a little bit of what I call Bloom's taxonomy or active verbs. Active verbs are so important when it comes to objectives and outcomes because active verbs help us determine measurable learning. Once again, active verbs help us determine measurable learning. So if I were to say, this week's learning objectives are, and then I'm going to put a colon. Now I want to make a list. I could do it here and just type in 1 and a period. But what if I want to indent? What if I really want to get fun? I can come up here to the number list and click it. And same as it would be in Microsoft Word, you click that button and it gives you a number 1 immediately. Now I'm going to give you an example of what we consider to be a non-measurable, non-active verb. Understand, learning. This one is a no-no. Try to steer clear of understand. It's very subjective. How do you measure understanding? That's the one thing I always want you to think of when you see that word as an objective or as an outcome. As you as the instructor, how can you measure understanding? It's very subjective, like I said. It's hard to assess. So consider changing understand with comprehend. Make it specific. A learning objective should be specific. A goal is more broad. A learning objective is more specific. So here we could say comprehend learning. Well, what kind of learning and how would we do it? I might add more information as it relates to higher education. That gets more specific. Now let me give you an example of a very specific and measurable verb at one of the more base levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Identify the process of note-taking. As you can see, every time I hit the Enter key, I receive a new number. So now I can continue my bullet list. So let's say I'll pop one more in here. So compare student learning styles in the classroom, and that could get even more specific if we really wanted to. But say I have only three learning objectives. To stop the numbers, what you need to do is not come up to the number list as soon as you're done typing your last objective, because what will happen is if you check this off, look what happens to the number 3. It disappears, so you have to click it again so it reappears. What you want to do after you write your last objective is to press enter or return, and then you go up to the number list button and then click it. So that way it unchecks it and stops your automatic numbering. So now say I wanted to use bullets. I could say, after this week, you should be able to, and then colon. Now I'll use bullets. Same procedure. Click on the bullet list, and it starts by indenting with my first bullet. So now comprehend learning as it relates to higher education. What could be an active verb that we could assess the student's comprehension with? You say comprehend learning, describe higher education learning. Identify the process of note-taking. We could use the same one if we chose to, but you could also say list of processes of note-taking. Compare student learning styles. You could say discuss student learning styles in the classroom. Now you can see all 3 of these here. These are more broad. We're going to comprehend learning, identify, compare the learning styles. These are things that we aim to provide to our students. Here in our outcomes, we want them to be able to describe it. We want them to be able to list them. We want to be able to let them discuss this. These are all things that we can actively measure using the tools in Blackboard. Describing higher education learning could be as easy as an essay test, a discussion forum. They could even create an assignment where they type up a paper in word processor and submit it to you through an assignment. List the processes of note-taking. Once again, dealer's choice. How do you want to assess it? Could be multiple choice, could be matching, could be listing them in order, could be even an essay as well. Discussing student learning styles. You could do any of the above. Discussion board, essays, quizzes, tests. There are a lot of choices. Now remember what I said. If you are on your 3rd or last objective or outcome and you're using bullets or numbers, make sure that you press enter after your last objective or outcome. Then unclick the button for bullets or unclick the button for numbers, whichever one that you're using, because then you won't lose your last bullet. Once again, I'll show you here, same thing with the bullets. I'm on my last outcome. I am going up to the taskbar or toolbar. I'm clicking on bullet list, and as you can see, my last student learning outcome for the week, it no longer looks in line and it doesn't look as pretty. So I will click the button for bullet list again. I will press enter or return, and then I will come back up and click bullet list to stop it from doing that. So here, this is the information we want to present to our students. Now I'm going to click submit. Now what you'll see and what Blackboard populates for you, once again you get the green receipt. Scroll down. Now you can see the book icon, which indicates that this is a module or a unit of learning, if you will. Week 1, the title of it, what's the basic title? I'm giving a brief description, the objectives, the outcomes. Okay, now I could even at the bottom here, like I've done in the Online Teaching Elements course, give them a little bit of navigation instructions. Believe it or not, there may be a student out there or a learner out there who's not quite sure what to do. They may not know that underlines mean hyperlinks. That's always a good point. Try to steer clear of underlines unless they're absolutely necessary when using your text online. unless you want to confuse your student in thinking that it's a hyperlink, if they know that, of course. But once again, now we'll just click into here and we can go about the same methodology as we might normally do when it comes to creating a folder of information. Now, when you're creating your weekly unit, it's always a great idea to try to keep your units in line with each other, uniform. So if you start out with creating an item and you start out, say, with, for instance, a to-do list, you could create the to-do list here, click submit, and it's always another good idea for you as well. Students like those to-do lists because they can just check them off when they're done. You may see them in each of our weekly areas as course maps or to-do lists. You can add anything you would like here. However, I would steer clear of using lesson plans for this project. SCORMs, Evolve Portal, don't bother with that. Open content unless you're really excitable. YouTube videos are fun. If you have SlideShare presentations, you can use those as well. Some faculty I work with like to use the NBC content. They add video materials from the real world to help bring life to their materials online. But in a module, if you've already created a module, it will not give you that option anymore because you're already in it. Stick with some of the very basic ones: items, files, audio, video, web link. You may even wish to put a content folder. Module page is not necessary. So say, for instance, I'll create another item. I'll create this lecture PowerPoint. And I'm not going to add a description here in the text box, but descriptions are very relevant to students. They really like to know what they're accessing. They really want to know that. As you can see here, these look like empty items. That's because they are. Say, for instance, I'm going to create an assignment. Now, okay, they have a to-do list. They've watched the lecture. Now I'm going to put in an assignment where give them instructions. Those are always important. Students love redundancy when it comes to instructions because having to click back 2 or 3 times, sometimes that's just too much. And as us, as we as online learners know, sometimes it gets a little frustrating. So having everything in front of a student's screen is always a great idea as well. It's just a best practice I like to share. You can attach a rubric file here if you wish. You can let them know their due date. Due dates are very important. Once you put in a due date in any particular assignment or assessment in Blackboard, it automatically populates in their calendars. And you can actually see it up here in the global navigation menu when you click on calendar. And that's at the top of your screen where your name is. And if you have your profile picture and you've done the weekly challenge, you'll see there's a red number next to your name. Points possible, we'll just put in 1 here because it's going to yell at me and tell me I have to. So we'll make the assignment available. You can display or restrict the availability. You can track the number of views, see who has been in there, who hasn't. These are all options. Anytime you create a page, anytime you create a file, an item, anything in Blackboard, my best practice and advice for you is to start from the very top of the page and work your way down. So now you can see this is my basic module here. I've gone through, I've created the basic page, which I'll go back to the basic page. This is what students see. All right, here's the weekly areas, and I'm actually going to drag this up because the other 2 are just sample text. This is what we've created. We created a module, and we titled it Week 1, Intro to Learning. We walked through the process of putting in a brief description of what students can expect to see, which is helpful because then they know what they're clicking on and why they're clicking on it. The objectives that this module is aiming to provide to the students, and what they should expect to be able to do when they're done, and what you expect them to do, and ways that, hidden to the student, of course, that you may be assessing them. You can indicate just by the active verb. So now let's click on Week 1 as a sample learner. All right, sample learner is confronted with a to-do list right away. That's a great idea. PowerPoints, or say you're doing a video lecture using the Blackboard Collaborate Ultra tool that we have, highly suggested. It's under web meetings. You can record yourself and do all kinds of wonderful things there. If you have any other questions, just let me know. And then, of course, once they've gone through the to-do list, there's a PowerPoint, a sample assignment, and all of this information is right here. If you structure each one of your learning modules, each one of your weekly areas in this fashion, students will begin to understand, and I know it's subjective, they'll be able to recognize the routine that they can expect to see every module or unit for the week of your semester course. Now, another thing some of you mentioned is that, oh, I really liked that table of contents. These 3 icons here give you an overview of the pages within a module. So this is more of a fancy way to create a course, if you will, but learners would be able to navigate between any one of these pages if there were content, which, as you can see, there is not. If you choose not to use a module area, you can do a different or more simplistic way, which is under Build Content to create a weekly content area just using a content folder. Many of you may be more familiar with using a content folder, and that's perfectly fine. Like I said, I always tell you, if it's your course, you're the subject matter expert, you know your students' learning styles best, and present the material in a fashion that makes sense to them. Not the instructor, makes sense to the student. So, but for instance, let's try a content folder. Once again, I go and navigate with my mouse up to Build Content. It brings up the pop-up menu. I navigate over to the right. The first one that I can click on is Content Folder, and I'll click on Content. Now it brings up a new page. I clicked on Create Content Folder. We'll call this one Week 1, and we'll just call it this one just for heck's sake. Why not? This is Content Folder. So I could take the text that I had written in the module, but same method. Brief description. You can see my Grammarly is coming up. It's a beautiful tool. Brief description of what students can expect to view, do, and etc. Why not? So learning objectives. How do I make my learning objectives? Which are the 2 buttons? Hopefully you're answering this in your head. It reminds me of one of those Sunday school specials. Navigate up to the top of your toolbar on the very top row. Remember, if you don't have it expanded, go all the way over to the very far right icon, the 2 double V's, click it to expand it. Then you go over about 2/3 of the way on the first bar, and you'll see bullet list will pop up or number list. I'm going to use bullet list for learning objectives. So I'll say identify, recognize, define, recognize. Some of you may already know that Blackboard isn't always very friendly when it comes to spell check, especially if you have to back up halfway through a word and then continue typing if you've made a mistake. Don't worry about those little squiggly underlines. You can always double check, but like I said, Grammarly is another good tool to use when you're creating an online course. It catches those mistakes our eyeballs get tired of seeing and just start to ignore. So, okay, I've written my 3 learning objectives, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press enter, and then I'm going to navigate up to my bullet list button and then uncheck it. So that creates my bullet. So now learning outcomes, I'll use my number list. Click on the number list button or icon, and I'm going to recognize, describe, evaluate. As you can see, once I press enter one more time or return, I click on the number list button and it disappears. So now, and I'll show you how to do this here, in the bottom far right, you'll see a Resize text editor. Click and hold, or left click and hold, drag. This expands your tool area and text area. Click, hold, and drag. Makes it bigger, easier way to work with your information. So now you can see it says that brief is a bad. I'm going to ignore it. You can see the outcomes. I'll click on submit. And the next thing you'll know is I will see a content folder. Now if you look, let me close it, make this a little smaller. There isn't much of a difference here. You can see week 1, the icon is different, but that's about it. They're very similar. One allows you to have a table of contents. The other one presents all of your material all at once. So for instance, if I create a to-do list, extra PowerPoint, and one more, why not? We'll do the assessment again, or assignment. Put points possible, press submit, boom. Here we have it. It's very similar, except you're missing your table of contents. One thing about a content folder is it does present all the information all at once to your students, whereas a module page may not. You can enforce sequential viewing with a module page. Excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice already. So I'll show you how to do that by going back to your module. Here, you see the book with the little tabs, your title. To the right, you see the gray chevron. Click, choose Edit, and in the Edit Learning module, if you scroll down, you can choose under Learning Module Options to enforce sequential viewing of Learning Module. You can also choose to have it open in a new window. So module or learning modules do provide you with a little bit more finesse, but they're not always necessary. Once again, based on the information that you provide in your course, you're the course expert, you determine which way you should present your material to your students. Click submit if you make changes, and there you have it. So now if I go into my weekly areas, I will see this each week. Just for fun, I'll show you a course that I'm teaching right now. If I click on Introduction to Gerontology, which is the semester course I'm teaching, you can see I've created a funny little banner here. Poor Mr. Simpson. Start here syllabus. You can see there are quite a few of these course menu links. I've called my class areas weekly class areas. Instead of using module pages or learning modules, I've used weeks. You can see the course content is in a folder. If I tell them what we're basically going to go over, the objectives, the outcomes, I give them basic instructions. Click on week 4, the title. I provide them with information of what they should do. I give them some PowerPoints, and this is just one part of the course. The discussion board link. I give them practice activities to test their mastery. I give them an assignment. I give them an additional assignment. So they have their hands full this week. There's a lot of information in this course that they have to find, and they also have to be self-motivated. That's one of the main important things about online learning. You have to be self-motivated. Procrastination is your enemy. Hopefully this helps. I hope you all have a good afternoon. Stay hydrated, stay cool. If you have questions, please contact me. You can email me. That is the fastest way to get a response from me. For those of you that emailed me on 4th of July, you know that, and especially on the weekends too. My phone, unfortunately, I do have an addiction. I'm addicted to my phone and answering my email. So if any questions, please email me. Otherwise, from 8 to 4 on the weekdays, typically I'm in the office on Toledo campus. I'm located in the library in room 126. I try to tell people to look for the fake trees and you'll find my office. Now, if you have anything else, feel free to shoot me an email. Look forward to talking to you, and great work on your discussion forums already. Keep it up. Keep it up.